But I also would, say to round out the picture of McChrystal, the U.S. military today knows that it needs to be open with information. Now, they made a huge mistake in how they handled this. And again, Doug Macgregor did, I think, a brilliant job of explaining the kind of psychology and the kind of mistakes that may have led to this. But the basic notion that they somehow have the luxury of being completely private is not true. McChrystal was very private when he was a special operations guy for many, many years. He knows how to keep his mouth shut. But in this job, he was told to be more public. He just made a mistake, and a big mistake, about how to do that in this case.
Here's an email from CL in Carrboro, North Carolina, who says, I completely support General McChrystal's freedom of speech. As a military man, however, he has now proven to be insubordinate to his commander-in-chief for a second time. I hope the president accepts his resignation, as I truly believe there must be another general as capable as he is in military terms. If not, then we're truly in trouble. James Kitfield.
Well, there are no indispensable individuals in fighting a war. That's absolutely true. So if Obama decides that he cannot trust this commander, in which case he should definitely accept his resignation, then there are many able people who can take over and take charge. There is going to be probably, as Michael has pointed out recently, there's going to be a learning curve, though. When you change leadership, you change leadership staff, there is a shaking out period. It just has to happen. You could probably mitigate that somewhat if you gave it to General Rodriguez, a 3-star who's already in theater and running day-to-day operations. But what you would worry about at this critical juncture, this summer may be the pivot point for the Afghan war, this summer and fall. At that critical juncture, do you have time to sort of have a learning curve at the very top? That will be weighing heavily on President Obama's decision.
And here's another question that a number of our listeners have raised. This one from Barbara. She says, I hope President Obama fires McChrystal on the spot. I thought it was wrong that Obama picked him for this mission, knowing he was one of Bush's puppets who tried to cover up the Pat Tillman death. Colonel Macgregor.
Well, first of all, I think it's very important we understand we're not facing the Soviet armed forces. We're not facing the German Wehrmacht. This is not a dangerous enemy that presents an existential threat to our forces in the field. This is a very weak adversary in Afghanistan, just as it was a very weak adversary in Iraq.
Then why haven't we defeated the adversary?
I think that's a separate discussion, but I think it's important that we back away from this notion that you can't make any changes. In 2 years during World War II, we replaced 32 generals in the Army commanding divisions and corps while we were fighting the Germans. There are no indispensable men. Charles de Gaulle said that the cemeteries are full of indispensable men. Charles de Gaulle was right. What the president needs, and hasn't, in my judgment, gotten, is an honest and objective assessment from the generals, and specifically from whoever commands in Afghanistan. If you go back to Bob Woodward's book, I think it was a State of Denial, there is a section in there where he recounts a conversation between General Jack Keane, the former Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, and Secretary Gates, and this is in 2008, and he says, now, Mr. Secretary, you want to ensure that regardless of whomever the American people elect, we continue to pursue the same policies and we continue to do the same things that we've been doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. He said, and Secretary Gates said, well, yes. He said, then you must promote and establish an authority, the men you know we can rely on to keep this going. What I'm trying to tell you is that these are politicized officers. They're not just generals called to duty. These people are committed to the long war, and they've been giving advice that's consistent with that ideological position. I hope that the president acts decisively and removes McChrystal. And then I hope that he doesn't simply take whomever is often, but says, I want to talk to 5 general officers and ask them, and then I want to send someone there, tell them to make an evaluation in 30 days, and come back and give me an honest, objective assessment.
How does this kerfuffle, if I can call it that, compare to General MacArthur's firing by Harry Truman? James Kitfield.
Doesn't really even compare. What MacArthur did was borderline treasonous because he took a position in a theater of war that he knew was diametrically opposed to his commander-in-chief, and he publicly said that he was doing such. And the stakes were incredibly high, getting us involved in war with China. Truman had absolutely no choice. That was, and he was backed up by the entire Joint Chiefs. So, MacArthur was really off the reservation. This is something entirely lesser than that. This is a guy who allowed his staff to get drunk with a reporter and run their mouth. Having said that, he has shown that there's a culture and an ethos here, to me, that is not adapted to really a much broader strategic picture that he is now in charge of. He seems to have a culture and ethos that reflects to me the sort of locker room mentality of what you frequently see in these direct action special forces units. Very little, the senior officers and the enlisted guys talk to each other, not sir. It's very informal, it's very secretive, and it's very testosterone driven. And it seems to have crept into a very high headquarters for a theater-wide war where it's entirely inappropriate, and that goes to his judgment. But does not rise to the level of MacArthur.
Of course, this is a true dilemma for the president. If he doesn't fire General McChrystal, he's going to be seen as weak. If he does fire him, people are going to begin to question his commitment to the war. Doesn't that put him between a rock and a hard place, Michael?
Well, I suppose that's true, Diane, but this is one of the reasons why I've really become an admirer of President Obama in many ways. I don't think he's going to think of it in those terms. And he's not just going to use rhetoric to suggest otherwise. I believe his own thinking really will focus on the Afghanistan war. And he will think, does McChrystal's role in my policy team here, which has become tortured, outweigh the excellent team work that he's doing in Afghanistan with allies, with President Karzai, who's a big supporter, because McChrystal knows how to talk to Karzai, by the way. He actually goes in and publicly has a good relationship